Okay, this is going to be part 6 of our recording of the book that will forever change our ideas about the Bible by Mauro Beglino. For anyone just tuning in, he was a translator for the Vatican. He translates Hebrew. He translates cuneiform, the original language that the Sumerians wrote in. This is one of the only people I would really trust about any of this stuff because he actually translates the languages that this stuff was first written in. It's very controversial, but if you're just tuning in here, we're about 3.5 or so hours into this. I would start with the first upload of it because you missed a bunch of good stuff if you're just watching this for the first time. This is your first exposure to the book. Okay, this next title, the next chapter is titled "The Glory of God," and again, we got the Hebrew translation for these words here. We must say that the glory of God is a concept not easily understood. It has several meanings related to each other, but that are also independent. The glory of God, and again we got the Hebrew word for it, is the Hebrew term alternatively readable as either kivod / kibod or kavod / kabod or kabod. It derives from a verb indicating the concepts of to be relevant, to have importance, to be honored, or to be tough. The adjective kabed identifies what is quote-unquote heavy, grievous, difficult, important, honored, but also insensitive. In parentheses it says hard-hearted. The Greeks have translated this term with the word doxa or doxa, which in turn has been translated into the modern languages with glory, in parentheses. The translation of this term has always been influenced by a divinity representation that, as we have seen, does not correspond to all the Elohim's descriptions in the Old Testament. Elohims were in fact anything but spiritual beings. The fanciful theological elaboration has totally twisted the meaning of the term in order to make it the representation of deity immanence and make it a parallel with the concept of sanctity. Here, the translation of the concept of quote-unquote glory means something quite different. This change in meaning is due to the need felt by theologians to find a way to reconcile the term kivod with the idea of God they have artificially elaborated. That's going to piss people off. That's going to piss off all those religious cult leaders making money off their church attendees. All those pastors and popes and bishops and all these people that act as third-party intermediaries between their falsified idea of God. It's going to piss all these people off that a book like this is floating around out there and people like me are reading it online for free, putting it out there. In fact, the root consonant of the glory of God, and again, it's the Hebrew word we're referring here to, this root consonant refers very clearly to the concept of being heavy, tough, strong. In parentheses, it says strength and weight are thus two key aspects inherent to this term and fundamental to all words with this root. By extension, to be powerful also indicates being rich and therefore honored. In other words, the meaning of weight and honor were interpreted as attributes of a god seen as a spiritual and transcendent entity capable of becoming immanent when he chooses to reveal his presence to the faithful people. Let's look at the passage of the Old Testament that tells about this quote-unquote glory and the way it manifests in man. According to the representation of the Anunnaki Elohims in the Bible, individuals of flesh and bone, material creatures of the human species, with which they kept on having relationships. Of course, we must not forget that if this hypothesis is as valid as we think, there was not an equal relationship between the two species. Even if man was created with resemblance to the Elohims and with their image, we must remember that the latter were individuals whose power and importance were much more superior to the atoms. Again, they dumbed us down. In short, it was about a balance of power regulated by a pact of coexistence in which one of the parties was undoubtedly the stronger party. Therefore, the latter had quote-unquote weight, and his weight was duly recognized and honored. Man, in his weakness, could not do otherwise. This next section is titled The Covenants. It's useful and interesting to recall that the expansion Old Testament indicates a covenant, the old one, an agreement between an Elohim who proposed it and a people that accepted it. What is never sufficiently emphasized is that the people could choose to not subscribe to this covenant. They had no obligation to accept it. All commitments are born only after a second party acceptance. In short, the Jews did not have the idea of God as a transcendent and unique entity, and therefore a relationship with him was not perceived as ineluctable. In other words, they could refuse any contract or commitment which was presented to them. The whole history of Israel is full of betrayals, abandonments, cults dedicated to other deities, also called Elohims, all concrete, all present, like the Elohim leading Israel and with whom there had been this alliance. The Jews would serve him, and he would help them conquer the land and become a nation. The same Elohim repeatedly called himself jealous, and we wonder, how can one be jealous of a partner if there is no rivals in the relationship? It's a very good question. The Christians always think, oh, there's only one God, there's only one true God. Well, yeah, if there's one, how can he be jealous of others? The covenant, or pact, provides for an exchange, a giving and receiving which only involves the two parties at the expense of the people who were not included in this absolutely concrete and human alliance. The covenant provided for the exclusion of outsiders, even their total annihilation if necessary, in order to achieve the goals in order to achieve the goals common to both Elohim and Israelites, to conquer and govern over territory. Still going on today. Nothing's changed. After the first part of the conquest of Canaan, Joshua asks the people to freely choose whether to continue to serve the Elohim who is guiding them or to serve other Elohims, all of which were real, present, concrete, and who provided potential places of worship or service. Only after the people had confirmed their choice to serve the same Elohim who is called Yahweh, the covenants and commitments were confirmed. This contract, the covenant, had severe consequences if the agreement was broken. The choice was the choice was again absolutely free. There are no doubts nor any need for interpretation in the text that tells us about the episode. All this clearly written in chapter 24 of the book of Joshua, verse 14-25, a highly significant and little-known story underlining the concrete materiality of the facts, in contrast with our traditional vision of the people of Israel and their relationship with God. In accordance to the concrete characterizing, sorry, let me read that again. In accordance with the concreteness characterizing our journey, we will now examine the passage of the Pentateuch in which the Kivod arrives in a special, original, extraordinary, concrete, and absolutely amazing way. It is the book of Exodus, chapter 33. Moses and his people were wandering in the deserts, and at each resting place, Moses took the conference tent or a meeting place and pitched it outside the camp. In fact, the text specifies far away from the camp. Then whoever wanted to meet the Elohim had to reach this meeting place that was outside the camp. The text underscores that the tent is away from the camp. Throughout the pilgrimage to the Promised Land, a column of smoke clouds that overnight became a pillar of fire led the people, and when Moses wished to confer with the Elohim, he approached the meeting tent, entered it, and then we're going into the Hebrew translations of the words here that are, I was referencing Exodus 33, verse 9. We have the Hebrew words amad vi, anon he, amud jired, or jared, which translates to stood, and cloud the of column descend. And then we have more Hebrew words down here. Moske im. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing these right. I'm trying my best here. So this is my first time actually trying to comprehend Hebrew. But these Hebrew words again: Moses with spoke and tent the opening of the at. And again, reconstructed in the translation here. The column of cloud descended and stood at the opening of the tent and spoke with Moses. Thus the pillar of cloud made a descent and always took the same specific position. This was not a strange sort of vision or imaginative representation made up in order to impress, is clear as day. It was, in fact, a real description consistent with the rest of the story, in which the narrative characteristics are aimed at describing in detail what was happening without neglecting any details. In the next verse it said, and again more Hebrew translations here, Anain he amud et am ha-kol ra'ah the, cloud the of column, people the all saw, and tent the of opening, the at in parentheses and being, reconstructed here, all the people saw the column of cloud at the opening of the tent. At this sight, the people would stand up and then prostrate, each one close by his own tent. Clearly, at this conference place outside the tent, something reserved only for Moses happened. The others could watch only from a distance without approaching. On these occasions, Moses spoke to the Elohim who descended in the tent. It was an utterly conventional, normal interview, the narrator clarifies. And indeed, the two communicated. And this is referring to Exodus 33:11. Again, more Hebrew words and the way, then the pronunciations translated into English. Askir ka panim el panim, like as face to face. U rechi el isk jedebir, his neighbor to man would talk or talk. Face to face as a man talks to his neighbor is the translation for that. Then there is concrete wording in this Elohim that this Elohim used to move with something that by day was as shrouded in the stream and at night was visible from the fire from the fire it produced. Once on the ground, the Elohim had regular colloquial meetings with Moses, but what was this something that was used to move? Probably some kind of advanced technology that transported them wherever the heck they wanted to go, in my opinion. The kivod, or kivod. The story of the meetings and talks between Moses and the Elohim continues by expressing Moses' doubts. This quote-unquote God with a lowercase g gave Moses neither sufficient guarantees or certainties. Then Moses actually asks him to lead the people on the way to the promised land and stresses that everyone needs to see very clearly that the Elohim is with them. Otherwise, there is no distinction between these people and any others. The quote-unquote divine presence must be clearly visible. The Elohim understands the situation, agrees, and promises that he will do what Moses demands. Despite this promise, Moses then asks to see and touch the kivod. So he asks him, and this is referred to Exodus 33:18. And it's got the Hebrew translations of this here. Basically, Moses asks, please let me see what is on your kivod, or kivod. Therefore, Moses wants proof and asks the Elohim, since he is making promises of conquest, to see something that attests his physical presence. Moses needs some guarantees. He wants to talk to his people advisedly if he is to convince or urge them to follow this Elohim instead of any others. He wants to be sure of what he is saying. This Elohim understands the need and agrees with Moses' request, but warns him that what is about to occur is extremely dangerous. It can also cause his death. Virtually, the quote-unquote glory of God that Moses asks to see can kill a man. This means that the glorious manifestation of divinity is potentially lethal. Does the outcome of spiritual transcendence kill? Isn't God able to control his power? We question, obviously not. I mean, geez, just go read the Old Testament. The whole book is about God telling people to kill and conquer other lands and take all their belongings and then burn everything in the middle of their courtyard to make an example out of it and turn the women into slaves. And people actually built a cult-like religion out of this, and they fell for it. I guess the Anunnaki's genetic manipulation and dumbing people down really worked. Not for me, but for the sheeple people. This event cannot be dispensed or otherwise filtered. The Elohim can only provide guidance to control the effects of his glory, offset consequences, but not undo to mitigate them in advance. This quote-unquote glory necessarily acts with all its deadly power. If you think that kabod is usually translated as quote-unquote glory, which is a very abstract concept, a kind of theological category not easily definable, it becomes difficult to understand why the Elohim prepares the event of quote-unquote manifestation by giving Moses a series of operational guidelines and practices very clearly and exclusively aimed at physically safeguarding him. Instead, this is exactly what happens. The Elohim gives Moses some practical guidelines and precise precautions. After telling Moses he cannot look in front of it, or in parentheses it questions stand before it, because he would die, he adds a piece of advice, practical guidance. Again, we're going into the Hebrew translations here of what it said. It says, here's a place close to me, and you will stand up against the rock. The indication is so colloquial and concrete as it seems we are watching the scene and the gesture of the arm indicating that very place a sort of saying, stay here and try to keep firmly in place. Apparently, this measure did not seem sufficient, considering the Elohim adds a further recommendation. Again, more of the Hebrew words translated into English. My kivod passes by, cross when in, rock the of, cleft in, you put, will I, and you two on, my palm, cover will I, and again, I through go until. And when my kivod passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my palm until I have passed by. We now wonder, what might this quote-unquote glory be that could only be seen from the back, but not directly? What was then passing by Moses so dangerous as to require a special protection? How could the Elohim protect Moses with the palm of his hand while it was passing by? Several versions of the Bible contain this meaning that the Catholic tradition has now accepted, but this passive acceptance brings the difficulty that questions themselves highlight. Indeed, it is difficult to find the explanation if one keeps thinking that the quote-unquote glory of God was something transcendent. The solution is in fact possible when presented that the light of what we are trying to demonstrate, the concreteness of the described event, it should be recalled shortly after, before the Elohims used the expression, a place nearby me, and shows Moses a cleft that evidently was placed nearby him and that would provide him with protection. The word kaf, or kaf, K-A-F in Hebrew, hence the expression kapi in Hebrew, of the aforementioned verse also indicates a quote-unquote cavity as the palm of a hollow hand. This is not all. Another meaning of the root kaf is rock. Its meaning in Hebrew is borrowed from Aramaic. Therefore, we can suppose to overcome the traditional interpretive difficulties, thinking that the Elohim advises Moses to remain in the quote-unquote cleft of the rock, and that he will cover the cavity while passing. Summarizing, Yahweh agrees to show the kivod in action, and to do so without producing irreversible consequences for Moses. He orders him to take cover in the cleft of the rocks. Moreover, after this experience, followed by the delivery of the tablets of the law, Moses has his face flushed as burned, requiring to be constantly covered by a veil, which is only removed when he enters the tent before the Elohim in Exodus 34:29. What happened? Was he exposed to a powerful source of energy? Was he hit by a radiation such as a solar one that produces harm? These effects, however, do not seem strange if one considers that Exodus 24, verse 15 through 17 says that when Moses climbs into the mountain, the Elohim stays on the top, producing a cloud covering it. And again, we go into the more Hebrew words, what they sound like, and then translate it into English. And the cloud covered the mountain, and the kivod of Yahweh installed on the mountain. This verb installed indicates at the very act of settling in order to abide, dwell, with the same meaning. The verb recurs several times in other passages of the Old Testament. And here the verb expresses the very act of placing, settling, and then abiding on the mountain. It seems to see an aircraft landing with great visual and spectacular effects, actually. And then we go into more Hebrew translations here. Yahweh kivod matrei, Yahweh of kivod, of view, and mount, the on top, or of on top, devouring, fire-like. And in view of kivod of Yahweh was like devouring fire on top the mount. This was what the Israelites did see from below. The kivod appeared as fire or as a cloud, and the Elohim usually called Moses from the middle of the cloud in which Moses then entered. Therefore, this is a description of a concrete and evident physical event, a phenomenon taking place before everyone's eyes, and observable even from the valley below. Particularly impressive is the so-called theophany, or appearance of God, described in chapter 19, when the Elohim manifests on the mountain along with seemingly terrifying phenomena, thunder, flashes of light, and the cloud of prolonged sound similar to a trumpet. On the occasion, therefore, the Israelites' terrified eyes, Mount Sinai, and Exodus 19:18. Again, we're going into more of the Hebrew words and the translations. That, because of faces from, it all smoked, fire in the, or fire the in, Yahweh it on descended. It smoked from all faces because Yahweh descended on it in fire. The descriptions are too detailed the descriptions are too detailed to be interpreted as quote-unquote visions or memories of atmospheric phenomena, in parentheses, which nomads were certainly used to, nor can it be interpreted as a naive desire to make up some form of appearance aimed at amazing the reader. Religious literature has done much more in this case. Here we are reading about extraordinary events witnessed by an entire group of people. This was a specific phenomenon absolutely new to the ordinary experience of those people, consisting of images, sounds, and situations that, if for a moment we get rid of prejudices and freely follow the current thinking and knowledge, are caused by a presence of something that manifested very powerful. Indeed, the term kivod does identify this, what is heavy and strong. Today, kaved, or kaved, the adjective, could be an airplane, a tank, a ship, an elephant, perhaps just the traveling machines used by the Anunnaki Elohims. The next section is entitled Glorious Assumptions and Conclusions. One of the most important Jewish scholars, Rashi of Troyes, 10th century AD, commenting on the book of Genesis, he depicted a very realistic figure of the throne of glory of Yahweh when he said that in origin it was suspended in the air and hovered over the face of the waters like a dove is suspended above its nest and obeyed his command. That sounds like a flying saucer, a UFO, a TR-3B. The Jewish commentator also said that the glory was something external from God, an instrument God commanded and used to move. Doesn't it seem to be describe the control panel of a flying object? Perhaps this realism was the reason why the passage was included among those which must be read and explained by a teacher only to the student deemed able to understand and accept them. We then would define it an initiatory or esoteric piece reserved for a few. It must be said that this device still keeps its validity today. How many could peacefully accept the idea that God was in fact an extraterrestrial that traveled on flying machines? How many would instinctively rebel against such an acceptable claim? All the religious institutions would rebel against that because it's going to cut into their profits. All their blind sheeple people followers would realize that they're all full of shit. By contrast, the entire history of the traditional commentators that stubbornly refuse the hypothesis give accounts of the enormous difficulties in undertaking and describing the kivod in terms of spirituality and transcendence. Not knowing how to reinterpret this evidence and not wanting to simply accept the evidence of a story, they have been forced to introduce complex concepts of the quote-unquote glory of God. They have said and have written that, and we're going into a whole bunch of bullet points here about what the glory of God has, and again, this is all referring to the glory of God, of what they have, what the Israelites and all these people have said and have written about it. It is like a multifaceted diamond that reflects light in various ways and degrees. It is a difficult concept to be analyzed. It is a theological category. Its many possible meanings help us to understand something of the mystery of God. It denotes the revelation of God's being, nature, and presence. It is an impersonal physical phenomenon separate from him, but his personal manifestation to men. It is the manifestation of divine transcendence. It is the saving power of God. It is the revelation of how he wants to be known. His glory is his right to rule by virtue of his being God. The glory of God descended on earth to enlighten the people darkened by the clouds of Satan. God's glory is something that transcends the short space of our stay on earth, and so on. Sounds like highly advanced flying technology, weaponized technology to me. What do you think? As you can see, when driven by prejudice and out of necessity, these scholars must give free rein to imagination and use the issue that best responds to their own personal need to represent the divine. It seems to us much easier to think that whomever wrote the text has transposed on paper the story of real physical phenomena repeatedly witnessed by hundreds or thousands of people, and then handed down over time, at least in its substantial aspects, albeit with all variations that oral transmission inevitably produces. Okay, we're going to take a break there. The next section is called the Ten Commandments. Now, this book is really interesting. I mean, they're just they're uncovering all the missing puzzle pieces and all the metaphorical words that people were so confused about. This really puts it into perspective that they show the literal Hebrew words, how they sound, and then translate it into English, and then reconstructs everything to make a whole lot more sense than what these these salary slave private school teachers were regurgitating for $35K a year.